We are engaged in an extraordinarily important debate, and it's somewhat disappointing that the debate has been shortchanged for procedural maneuvers by the minority party in terms of reading the bill and forcing a cloture petition to be filed. I think what Senator Kyl and many others have said I might not agree with, but it's important to have this vigorous debate, and I'm somewhat disappointed it has been curtailed. But now we are engaged in something that will impact this country and generations to come in a significant way. Seldom have we debated such an issue with global ramifications over decades and decades and decades. We talk about many times the burden that our children and grandchildren will bear as a result of the federal debt, but there is an equally daunting burden placed on generations to come if we fail to come to grips with carbon emissions. Each ton of heat-trapping carbon dioxide that human activity releases into the atmosphere remains there for 100 to 500 years, amplifying the warming effect on our planet, changing the climate, and fundamentally altering ecosystems, landscapes, and public health. The more carbon that is piled onto this ecological debt today, the more drastic the consequences will be in the future. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, the atmospheric concentration of greenhouse gases is now the highest it has been in 650,000 years, and it continues to grow. With near scientific certainty, the IPCC tells us that the high level of greenhouse gases in the air has led to the increase in global temperatures that has occurred since the beginning of the 20th century. This increase has accelerated in the last 50 years, making the years 1995 to 2006 the warmest on record. Indeed, global temperatures may now be the hottest observed in the last 1,300 years. The impacts of climate change are already observable. Higher ocean temperatures have led to an increase in the number of intense hurricanes in the North Atlantic over the last century. In Rhode Island, in Narragansett Bay, which is the jewel of our state, the water temperature has climbed 4 degrees Fahrenheit in the last 40 years, coinciding with the declines of flounder and lobsters, which are central to our not only economy but to our quality of life. Permafrost is thawing and becoming unstable, causing buildings to collapse in the Arctic region. In 2007, the extent of the Arctic sea ice was 23% less than the previous all-time minimum observed in 2005. Snowpack and glaciers are diminishing and are melting earlier in the spring. This, in turn, is causing a decline in the health of rivers and lakes and is threatening habitat for endangered species. There has been an effect on human health, with increased mortality from extreme heat and changes in infectious disease vectors. For instance, in Rhode Island, this has meant an increase in the incidence of tick-borne diseases, which in many parts of my state are becoming epidemic, and which 50 years ago, when I was a youth, was an incidental concern to Rhode Islanders. Today, it is central to a central public health threat. The best science tells us that we must begin to curb emissions within the next decade in order to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations and avoid the catastrophic effects of climate change. If we fail, temperatures will continue to rise with dramatic results. With an increase of 2 degrees Celsius, millions more people will experience coastal flooding each year. An increase of 3 degrees will result in the loss of 30% of the world's wetlands. An increase of 1 to 5 degrees will place 30% to 40% of species at risk of extinction. Hundreds of millions of people, including up to 250 million people in Africa, will lose access to reliable water supplies, and this will become a national security issue, an international stability issue, not just an environmental and economic issue. This is a fundamental debate that we must face. As I've indicated, this is not just an economic and environmental issue. The U.S. intelligence community has recognized the threat and is in the midst of conducting a national intelligence assessment of the effect of climate change on our security. Last year, the CNA Corporation's Military Advisory Board, consisting of 11 former general and flag officers, led by former Army Chief of Staff General Gordon Sullivan, called for action to stabilize global temperatures. They warned climate change acts as a threat multiplier for instability in some of the most volatile regions of the world. Projected climate change will seriously exacerbate already marginal living standards in many Asian, African and Middle Eastern nations, causing widespread political instability and the likelihood of failed states. Just this week, NATO Secretary General Jaap de Hoop Scheffer reiterated that the alliance must prepare for new threats that stem from the impact of global warming, saying climate change could confront us with a whole range of unpleasant developments which no single nation state has the power to contain. But regrettably, we've already witnessed some of the fortunate. The Washington Post last summer, UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon noted that amid the diverse social and political causes, the Darfur conflict began as an ecological crisis arising at least in part from climate change. As Secretary General Ban notes, protracted droughts likely brought on by climate change served to spur conflicts over resources and fuel the hatreds that brought genocide to that region and could bring it to other regions. With so much at stake, economic, environmentally, and in terms of our own security, the United States must act. As noted, NASA climate expert James Hansen recently wrote, carbon dioxide from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution is still present in the atmosphere today, contributing to the warming our planet is experiencing. He estimates that the responsibility of the U.S. for the level of greenhouse gases is 3 times those of other countries. It is imperative that we not only commence this debate, but I hope we move forward to resolute action. I certainly commend Senator Boxer for her efforts. She's been an extraordinary leader in this issue. I think we have to highlight some areas of concern that still we must address. I believe we should be setting more aggressive targets for emission reduction so temperature increases are contained within an acceptable range. I believe that we should set this goal in legislation. I was pleased to join as a co-sponsor of Senator Sanders' amendment to reach this goal. I'm also pleased that Senators Kerry and Feinstein have also weighed in on this important issue with suggestions and amendments to require scientific review by the National Academy of Science to ensure that the goals we're pursuing is sufficient to stabilize carbon concentrations. Second, I think we must ensure that emissions begin to decline no later than 2020. We have to implement a carbon cap as quickly as possible. And third, we should ensure that the needs of consumers, particularly low-income consumers, are recognized in the policy that we enact. We have to, I think, provide resources and authorization for weatherization programs and low-energy heating assistance programs. My colleagues speak about the impact on low-income Americans. Well, let's do something about it. Let's give them the assistance to make their homes more efficient and give them assistance with their fuel. We have to do much, much more, I think, than we're doing, but we have to begin. And I hope we can bring this debate to a conclusion and to a successful vote. This is something that will mark us not just for the few years ahead of us, but for the decades and decades and decades ahead. And again, let me commend Senator Boxer and all my colleagues for their work on this very, very important legislation, and I would yield the floor.